Only 5% are devoted to organizational innovations. So we are still stuck in that mindset of products instead of starting to look for how do we organize for a new society and a new enterprise. And that is the innovation space between financial capital and intellectual capital, cultivating the roots. So 10 years ago, we started the Scandia Future Center as a lab for organizational capital. That was the focus. So we had the metrics that I described this morning. The other dimension is how do you organize for the processes. So it was a two-track approach. And this lab has now 20 cousins around in Europe of similar type. And the idea is to move from technology as the asset to the future as an asset. To go beyond the traditional life cycle curves and turn the future into an asset. So we were actually having a tour this last summer in the tracks of Leonardo da Vinci in Tuscany, in Italy. And you know that the inventor of bookkeeping, Pacioli, 1494, as I showed this morning, he was the teacher of Leonardo da Vinci. Isn't that an interesting linkage? That the teacher of the bookkeeping was teaching Leonardo da Vinci. Furthermore, we learned during this that Leonardo da Vinci never spoke Latin. Latin was the knowledge language of that time, of the elite. The honorable people spoke Latin. So he was excluded from the knowledge sharing because he didn't speak Latin. So he was a knowledge outsider. So what did he do? Well, he did develop a number of approaches which today is called prototyping. This is his first bicycle, developed 500 years ago in wood. Prototype. He had no idea. He couldn't get to the knowledge because he was a knowledge outsider without the taxonomy. And he was working with futurizing. He was working with very intangible dimensions. Every innovation starts with investment into intellectual capital. Intangible processes. This is what the Ministry of Economics in Denmark is doing now as a cousin of Future Center. It's called Mind Lab. It has been extremely successful for revitalizing the policy of the Ministry of Economics in Denmark. This is the Ministry of Taxation in Holland, which has another one of Future Center for the funding and financing of wealth of tomorrow in social societies. This is the Innovation and Future Lab for Tourism in India by Tata Consulting Services. This is the Ministry of Agriculture and their Future Center in Holland. So how are you going to sharpen your minds? Do you have a Future Center? Do you have the Dragomans? Are you prepared to go into the ecology, like we heard from Chris earlier, that the ecology for the organizational and the joy zone? Can we do a little experiment? Can you look down into the papers in front of you? Focus on the paper and the pencil or whatever you have, or telephone or whatever you have in front of you. And then turn up your head, turn it to the person sitting next to you and look into the eyes of the person. I could see some smiles emerging. This is ecology in practice, to look into the faces of other people. This is relational capital. This is organizational capital. So how frequently do you meet other people when you stay in your office? How frequently do you meet with your customers? You have to spend your time outside. And that's why the bar Nonaka concept is a future center as well as a joy center. That's why the endorphins become so important. And a happy workforce makes for a healthy bottom line, according to Financial Times. I know it works. So the more joy we have in our enterprises, the more healthy it becomes. And this is the curve behind the one Chris was talking about, where you correlate the creativity in the age. The trick to get to this curve is actually based on two very simple metrics. One is you measure the number of smiles per day, or laughs, in the enterprise. A lot of laughs among youngsters, and then gradually it become more and more serious, and then it goes up again. The other one is number of questions. So how many questions do you have per day in your enterprise? So number of laughs, number of smiles, or number of questions. We practice that in this Center for Molecular Medicine. In the Center for Molecular Medicine, we were running with a deficit in our restaurant, and we had a lot of problems there. So we recruited a retired former nightclub director to run the restaurant. And he turned that restaurant into a tremendous, joyful, happy restaurant with a lot of knowledge exchange between the researchers and scientists. Because they came to a restaurant as a knowledge cafe, open space, and see each other, talk to each other, eat and drink together, and the knowledge flows. The happy restaurant. This is how they look like after being there. Happy faces. This is more organizational system. So it's the bridge between human capital and relational capital with a smiling face. And consequently, the CEO is not the chief executive officer anymore. The CEO is the chief endorphin officer. The chief endorphin officer to create the joy in the room. And that's why you could look at each other and see if you are joyful or not and what you can do about that. But it's about you. And this is the cover of Time magazine in December last year. They had a mirror on the front cover. And the question was, who is the leader? So then you look into the mirror and you see yourself. And you see your face. You are the leader of tomorrow. Isn't that interesting? So look into the mirror and see how happy you are, and if you are in charge of this. Do you see this when you look into the mirror? Of course you do. And that is the new bottom line, or the bottom line of society entrepreneurship, or social entrepreneurship. On the borderline between the public and the private sector. It's immense amount of opportunities. So therefore the leadership agenda is not about industrial efficiency. To some extent, it's about trade and networking, but most of all, it's about education and R&D. And this is proven by that R&D and the science sector is 4 times as important as the industrial sector for value creation of tomorrow. 4 times. This is an interesting illustration of it. Wikipedia. We've heard about Wikipedia. But what I find with Wikipedia as an illustration of social entrepreneurship is the following. If you take the traditional traditional encyclopedia, how frequently is that updated? Once every 10th year. How frequently is Wikipedia updated? Every second, on a global scale. So you see, you outsource or you insource, depending on how you view it. You insource the customer relationships out there, the capital in waiting, to help you to update the content of Wikipedia. The other is, of course, the Grameen Bank. One of the affluent growing banks, and he got the prize, Nobel Prize in December last year. Did he get it in economics? He's a professor of economics. Did he get it in economics? No. He got it for peace. Or, in other words, relational capital. Because he has invented a relational capital for the less affluent people to get microcredits. And he has 17,000 outlets. 17,000 outlets. And 97% of the customers are females, and they are part owners. The credit losses are only 1%. Traditional banks have usually between 5 and 10% credit losses. So the whole trick is the organizational system. So what we see is service users becoming investors, producers, designers, and innovators, like Wikipedia. So how are we going to do that in Thailand? Well, we are combining human capital, organizational capital, and relational capital. One illustration of that is this company. Chris, do you recognize them? This is AirAsia, advertising Manchester United. So they are using the airplanes as billboards for communicating with the fan club. 70 million people in the fan club of Manchester United, a British